Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm just referring to the motion that the committee report to the House its recommendation that the Liberal government abolish the consumer carbon levy, more commonly referred to as the carbon tax. Premiers and leaders of all political backgrounds have come out opposed to the Prime Minister's 23% carbon tax hike. And there is clearly momentum and a growing groundswell of support to scrap.
Yeah. It's just on the terminology. I don't think it is a tax according to the Supreme Court.
Well, this
when
is
the money is put back
debate.
in the pocket
I know.
of families.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's important. So
yeah, but I mean, it's
Court
people will
that a
debate it
tax,
till kingdom
when
come.
you take a levy and it's paid back to people,
I understand.
it's not a tax.
I understand. Go ahead, Mr. Leslie.
I will be sure to correct when Liberal ministers screw up in the House of Commons and accidentally call it a carbon tax instead of a price on pollution. I will call them out on it. Absolutely. I think that is
Supreme Court
critical that we be
decision.
honest.
Mr. Leslie has the floor. Mr. Leslie has the floor. Go ahead, Mr. Leslie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I was saying, that there is clearly momentum and a groundswell of support to scrap the carbon tax once and for all. From Liberals to NDPers to Conservatives, there is now an emerging consensus that the Prime Minister's 23% carbon tax hike was wrong and is punishing everyday hardworking Canadians across this country. And while the rural member from Milton likes to accuse anyone who disagrees with him of being a climate change denier, I don't think he would say that about the Liberal Premier from Newfoundland and Labrador, and I hope he wouldn't accuse the over 130 First Nations in Ontario that are taking the government to court over the carbon tax of that. He seems to save that vitriol for Conservative MPs who are proudly standing up for their constituents and their views. But that's not to say that this Liberal government hasn't attacked the Liberal Premier from Newfoundland and Labrador. And the Premier actually just came out publicly stating that the Prime...
Excuse me, another point of order? Yes.
Yes, I'm just wondering, given our time constraints, what the relevance of these comments are to the motion he's putting forward. These seem to be very politically motivated, and he was putting forward a motion on the carbon tax.
Yes,
or
I
the
would
price
agree.
on
It's
pollution,
politically
rather,
motivated.
There is no carbon tax.
Sorry, it's not a carbon tax, right?
Okay.
No, it's not.
Okay,
It's price of
order.
pollution. Referred
Colleagues,
to it as
colleagues,
such
colleagues,
three
we have
times.
guests today.
Your
We have
motion
guests.
refers it to it such, but you're right,
have
it does not,
guests.
and I'm glad you've acknowledged that.
Oh, absolutely.
Colleagues, we have guests, and we want to be on our best behavior, but that wasn't a point of order. Go ahead, Mr. Leslie.
And I was just, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I was just saying that the Premier of Newfoundland just publicly stated that the Prime Minister has tried to bait him with a, quote, certain ad hominems and name-calling. And I don't think the Liberal members on this committee would call the NDP Premier of Manitoba names for opposing the carbon tax, nor the Saskatchewan NDP leader. So instead of
Have you read your motion? Have you read it yet?
I did. It's on notice, so I just read the summary of it. I
understood.
could happily read it into the record if you'd like, but I just wanted to.
No, it's all right. It's okay.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask this question?
Yeah.
What is the relevance of this debate to the motion? That's what I'm trying to establish. Maybe it's not a point of order. I'm not sure what it is, but this debate is not relevant to the motion.
I don't have the motion in front of me. Can you? I mean, is it long? Can you just?
It's not that long. It's just given that on April 1st, the Liberal government increased the consumer carbon tax by 23%. That 70% of Canadians and 70% of provincial premiers are opposed to the latest carbon tax increase. That the NDP Premier of Manitoba recently came up against the carbon tax and plans to put forward a proposal to exempt the province from the carbon tax. The committee reports to the House its recommendation that the Liberal government abolish the consumer carbon levy, more commonly referred to as the carbon tax.
Okay,
So
go
it
ahead.
seems very relevant.
Thank you for reading that. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My point of all of this is that Conservatives are not alone. There are multiple people from multiple parties across Canada that now firmly disagree with the carbon tax. Now, my Liberal colleagues and their Environment Minister clearly don't care what their constituents are telling them. And I know that Mrs. Taylor-Roy and Mr. Longfield and Mr. Ali are clearly hearing from their constituents. And unlike the Parliamentary Secretary, which as is tradition must support his government, we have an opportunity to have the freedom of Liberal MPs come forward and stop supporting a proud socialist, radical activist environment minister who is previously best known for his arrest for scaling the CN Tower and climbing onto the roof of Alberta Premier Ralph Klein. So instead of shutting down debate, I would encourage my colleagues across the way to explain how many constituents have emailed or called their office and say that they do not support the carbon tax, because I am willing to bet that it is a hefty number. And we are all elected to help our constituents, and I think it's important that we listen to them. Despite the fact that we may all disagree on a number of policies, I think there's a real opportunity after 3 weeks of the 23% hike being in place in this country and angry Canadians from coast to coast to stand up to this Prime Minister. And I'd be remiss not to mention my colleague from Victoria, who said a few days ago the carbon tax is not the, quote, be-all, end-all.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Well, I somehow, go
He
ahead.
just misquoted me, so I would like to correct the record.
You want to correct the record? What did you say?
I said that the Liberals have been treating the consumer carbon price like the be-all, end-all of climate policy, like a silver bullet, that it is one tool in our toolbox to fight the climate crisis.
Okay. So that's on the record. Go ahead, Mr. Leslie.
I was going to agree with you, actually, because I think you're right, that there are many various ways to help reduce carbon emissions that don't involve taxing moms taking their kids to school or to hockey practice or to a tournament on the weekend or to a senior driving to the town next door to get groceries or to fill their prescription, or a farmer in Milton drying his corn at the end of harvest.
A point of order again, Mr. Chair.
Okay, another point of order. Yeah.
No, it's just he once again is referring to this as a tax, which is not what it is. He keeps telling a half-truth about what this is, and
yeah, I understand.
just want to, like Madame Collins corrected the record, I'd like to correct the record that this is not a tax.
Okay,
it's a
understood.
levy,
Right.
and that it's all returned to the
That's
consumer.
right.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Okay.
I would urge the member opposite, in fact, all members, to come and door knock in my riding. Come to Winkler, Altona, or Elm Creek, or Carman, and try to tell my constituents that this is not a tax, that they are, in fact, better off, and see what the response is. And I will happily come to any of your ridings and do the same, or we can collectively as a
Through the
committee go
chair,
across
please.
this
Through
country
the
and door
chair,
knock.
Mr. Leslie, through the chair, please. Please, through the chair.
You know what? I think it'd be very enlightening. I think it'd be very enlightening because, particularly
Through the chair.
through you, Mr. Chair, my colleague,
Point
Miss
of order,
Taylor
Mr.
Roy.
Chair.
I was
Ms.
trying to
Taylor
correct
Roy,
that
Ms.
there. Okay, yeah.
Colleagues,
My
please.
apologies, that was-
I will go to the points of order and we'll get back to Mr. Leslie, but let's, do this in an orderly fashion. Madame Chatel.
Yeah. I think on the door knocking, inviting us to door knock, when they door knock last election in
that's not a
favor
point of
of a
order,
carbon
Madame Chatel.
pricing, what was the answer then? When you
Madame Chatel.
wanted to have, sorry, Mr. Chair, when they wanted
non,
to
mais Madame
have
Chatel,
a
c'est pas un
carbon
rappel au
pricing,
règlement, ça.
did they do door
C'est pas un
knocking then?
rappel.
That is not a point of order. That is not a point of order, Ms. Chatel. Inaudible.
Mr. Leslie. Go ahead, please. But please stick to the motion and not so much to canvassing, yes.
I look forward to us all door knocking and hearing from Canadians on their views. My point is that the carbon tax is making it more expensive to heat your home, to eat, and to put a roof over your head. Now, I know you, Mr. Chair, made some comments in the previous meeting, and I respect you, and I don't want to bring into the fact that there seems to be a real lack of evidence, but that's the flip side of the entirety of this problem.
I have a point of order on that, but
Okay.
anyway.
I didn't try to quote you there.
Yeah, anyway.
My point is that the fact that this government, and I look forward to seeing what our motion from last meeting comes forward in terms of the modeling and assumptions to see what actually the emissions that are being reduced from this are. But my hope is that we don't just adjourn debate, that we don't just disregard the views of the First Nation chiefs across Ontario, the Liberal Premier from Newfoundland and Labrador, and frankly, my constituents, because that's my job, is to come here and defend them, and they are adamantly opposed to the carbon tax. Simply put, it's time we axe the tax for everyone, on everything, and for good. Thank you, Mr. Chair.